My faith is probably the primary motivator. I believe that it's my responsibility to advocate on behalf of those who, my tradition would say are the least, the last, the lost, and the left out. People who have been pushed to the margins. I think it's a divine mandate. I believe God to be a God that is on the side of the oppressed and the marginalized. Where I see injustice manifest itself, I feel called and compelled to do something about it. I mean, within reason, and by that I simply mean I understand that there's limits to my power, my knowledge, and my time, so I can't be the lead advocate on everything for everybody, but I definitely feel a sense of call, of vocation to try to be an advocate where I can.
Awesome. How can we change the world from right here in Tennessee?
Oh man, that's an abstract question. One of the things I think that we could and should be doing is more around educating people on issues that directly impact them where they are. I think that there's been such a disinformation campaign, such a pervasive ignorance coupled with political or administrative or executive arrogance that allows so many people to be exploited. So, whether it's from the pulpit, whether it's from the public square, whether it's in the classroom as a professor, a lot of what I commit myself to doing is trying to share information with people. So I think that that's one of the things. It's hard to take human rights away from people who are adequately informed and educated. And if you do manage to take them from them, it's more difficult to continue to keep those rights and privileges away from people who are enlightened and empowered and emancipated. So that's one of the things that I feel like we could do a better job of in Tennessee, whether it's within the education system, whether it's in the political realm with the political processes, what happens at the state house legislatively, just giving people access to honest and in as much as possible with human beings, objective information.
Yeah, excellent, I agree. I keep wanting to say yeah, but I can't.
You can't edit that out? No, I'm just...
No.
Yeah, I get it.
Why is it important for people to know the Universal Declaration of Human Rights?
So, in the latter years of Malcolm X's life, he seemed to be making a argument and a claim as what some would call like an ambassador for the African American community, not just in the United States, but across the globe. He seemed to be making a transition from an argument around civil rights, which is grounded in the understanding of rights granted to citizens based upon, social political constitutionality, where, if you go into some of the natural rights philosophies, which are at the foundations of many of the interpretations of the United States Constitution, if you go back to what we were talking about a minute ago insofar as vocation and divine authorization, I think that's where Malcolm was. I think that's where many other freedom fighters have been insofar as what stitches together the common humanity of all of the human beings on this earth. And I think that there are certain things that people should be entitled to no matter what country they live in, no matter what their gender, race, class, socioeconomic status. And I think that's what the Constitution for Human Rights tries to articulate. I don't think any of these documents are infallible or perfect. I mean, I don't think that about the scripture. I know I'm definitely in the minority in my faith tradition in that regard. But I do think that they're valuable in helping us shape and understand the substance of what it means to be human, or the substance of what it means to be part of a country or a nation in that regard. So, knowing that there's something that has been crafted that seeks to articulate that in a universal way, but is also attempting to be delicate and sensitive to some of those peculiar, specifics based upon social and political reality. I think that that's a valuable thing and something to reference. And I told you earlier, Malcolm, James Lawson, so many others who have made mention of it is what brought it into my public consciousness.
Right. I had the pleasure of meeting James Lawson a couple times.
I was on a panel with him back in February.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, man.
Where at here?
So it was virtual, but it was through Vanderbilt.
Okay.
And it was about voting rights and things of that nature. And,
okay.
there's been a couple of times where I've been fortunate to be mentioned or considered in that vein. I have a pretty good relationship with the family of C.T. Vivian, and of course, C.T. Vivian's family, and James Lawson, and we've been Congressman John Lewis, all of those freedom fighters who came through Nashville, American Baptist College, the civil rights movement. And anytime I'm, thought of in the same vein as some of them, I mean, it's definitely humbling and affirming. And so, having the chance to sit on a panel with him, I think was just spectacular, to listen to him, learn from him, and, think about ways that he and I may be similar, ways that we may be different, and what parts of that makes a difference. But he is, when I think about the Constitution for Human Rights, I do think about him evoking it in some ways that have been valuable to me.
Yeah, that's cool. So you got some Nashville connections and spent some time
I guess in a sense. So C.T. Vivian's people, primarily my connection with them is through Macomb, Illinois, where he grew up.
Oh, okay.
This is before he went to Nashville.
Okay.
So he went to high school in Macomb, Illinois. Western Illinois University is a gentleman there who I have a relationship with through my fraternity and through some of the academic networks that we have. And he started the C.T. Vivian Center.
Okay.
And he asked me to come, and they were doing a mural there in honor of C.T. Vivian. He asked me to come and give a keynote at one of the events. And that's where I got a chance to meet C.T. Vivian's family, many of whom I think one of his oldest daughter's in Peoria, Illinois, if I'm not mistaken. But his other children are in Atlanta. And so, I got a chance to meet them. But, when you think about, so for me, civil rights is a subset of human rights.
Yes.
And when you think about the people who have been very notable in the struggle for civil rights, especially civil rights connected to the Black freedom movement, I think that we cannot underscore enough how much they contributed to the development of social and political consciousness in the country. And I don't think we can underappreciate what it meant when you start hearing people talk about human rights and drawing those connections wait, so it's not just that you should get access to this because you were born between the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean, underneath, above the Mexican border and below the Canadian border. It's no, there's something that is grasping at universal human dignity, regardless of who's in office or irrespective of one's religious tradition or affiliation or ideology. And outside of that, what does it fundamentally mean to be human, and what should human beings have the unalienable rights to? And so I know some of this, language kind of echoes some of what's in the, Constitution of the United States and some of those amendments and things of that nature. But I think when you start talking about the Black freedom movement, and I think the civil rights movement with people like James Lawson and, Dr. King, of course, and I put Malcolm, and the list, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ida B. Wells, all of that. I think they were getting at something beyond the scope of just what is entitled to us in some nation state.
Yes.
It's like what is entitled to us because we bear the imprint of God, and because we exist in this, what did Dr. King call it, this inescapable web of mutuality, and the common destiny. So I think at its best, the Black Freedom Movement has definitely pushed us past the notion of civil rights connected to a country or a nation state and into human rights connected to our common humanity.
Yeah. So many people I talk to, they almost blend civil rights and human rights as the same thing. But it's really, there is a distinction, like you just said, and I think these guys were fighting for basic human rights and human dignity as well, as much as civil rights is.
Yeah, that's a. So number one, I wouldn't want to synthesize every civil rights leader's primary claims, because there are, as I was saying, even about myself and Dr. Lawson, there are some similarities, there are some differences. King, Malcolm, similarities, especially towards the latter end of their life, and some differences. And so I can't say that all of them grounded their activism or their efforts and initiatives in the spirit of human rights. I think some of them were, and many of us are consumed by this idea of country in ways that compromise commitments to common humanity. If you think about immigration as part of the conversation, I mean, even some of the more notable progressives, if you will, if you peel back some of the layers beyond these tacit talking points that people tend to present, I think you get into some of these distinctions about when people start thinking, well, no, as a citizen of this nation. And then here's something that I feel like Malcolm was delineating in a valuable way. Like, when it comes to human rights, what's a second-class citizen insofar as human rights are concerned? I don't think there is any, right? So because I don't think God creates any human, I don't think human beings are created or birthed in any subset of humanity. And so if you deal with civil rights, if you deal with rights connected to a civil society or a governmental order, I think there are ways, and we've lived it. My elders and ancestors absolutely have lived it, contributing to a country or a system or a structure or a society that does not value your full humanity, that does not even value your citizenship. I think Baldwin said to be African American is to be African without memory and American without privilege. So, I mean, there are some ways that there are some distinctions between the civil rights and human rights, and there are some instances where even some of the more fierce civil rights leaders did not push past the notion or the concept of country. And then there are some ways where, people maybe mature, evolve beyond that into this more universal or holistic understanding of rights. And I'll keep saying this as a parallel or as a point of correlation, unalienable rights. I think those things are valuable, and I think it's valuable since we agree to be, in the nation of laws. I'm going to try to drive the speed limit or within reason, right, based upon the laws that were passed in this city, county, state, and country where I reside. My tax money goes to all of that. I don't know how we would calculate taxes from a human rights perspective. I mean, I hope it wouldn't go to the World Bank. But
It's a whole other can of worms.
Absolutely. But I think the point is there are distinctions to be made when you start talking about civil rights and human rights. And I don't think it's innately evil to think about civil rights or innately subordinate. I think there's some value to how people organize a particular society within certain geographical borders and parameters and certain ideological borders and parameters. But I also think that there's something that's underneath any quest to honor the humanity and dignity of any human being, regardless of where they may be geographically or culturally located.
Yeah. I see. What would you recommend to someone who sees problems in the world and wants to make a difference?
Do something. I think sometimes, people are stuck in trying to figure out what to do. I think about several conversations I've had with people who have seen, some of the activism or the organizing, work that I've been involved in, or in some cases spearheaded. And, like, how do I get involved? I was like, this is a million ways. Read a book, write a letter, throw a brick, start a fire, organize something. So I think the cardinal sin insofar as injustice and evil is concerned is inactivity, to not do anything. I mean, you start by doing something, and then often when people start doing something, they learn more specifically what they ought to do. And I don't think it's always good for, me to direct someone individually on what they ought to do. But I do know you ought to do something. Show up somewhere, stand up for something, speak out on behalf of something. But I think that has to be grounded in a certain type of social and political and cultural consciousness. So, learn something, but do something. And learning something is doing something too. But be active. I mean, that's the root word of activism. It's to activate, to honor the spirit in one's own soul and space, and it's to do something.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to say?
I don't think. No, there is something. It's an honor to, receive recognition in this regard. Be part of this. I mean, I didn't even know about this whole program. Oh, the last 12 years, I think it is.
Yeah.
And never would have thought in a million years that there would be people, across the state of Tennessee, especially the way, Memphis tends to be shunned at by people out of Nashville, especially in the legislative chambers. Not everyday Nashvillians, of course, especially not the black ones who, there's some bond between, black folks in Memphis and black folks in other major metropolitan cities like Nashville. But I mean, I never would have thought in a million years that somebody would be like, hey, we want to, recognize you for your work here, insofar as human rights are concerned, although I do consider myself to be not just a civil rights advocate, but a human rights advocate. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be recognized in this regard.
Well, thank you very much. You certainly deserve it. Thank you.
Thanks. So I hope my mother Claudia and my sister Tierney and my wife Denise and my son Jalen would all, be proud about this recognition.